Hi, I'm Darlene Littlejohn, Eaton County, and it's good to see so many of my friends here. Norm asked me to introduce Gina. She's a strategic outreach advisor for Salt and Light Global, which is where our next speaker is from. Gina.
Thank you, Dar. Professor William Wagner will be our next speaker, and we are honored to have him. God put him in Lansing, Michigan so that we would get the best. And we have the best in each other, too. We have a rich state with many, many, many of God's resources who are his people. We work together, stay unified, we win. Professor William Wagner is Distinguished Professor Emeritus, specializing in constitutional law. He is a former federal judge, advisor to the Congress, has spoken all over the world, advising on legal affairs and defending some smaller countries against the United Nations bullying tactics, even. He also is president of Salt and Light Global, that I volunteer for also. It's saltlightglobal.org if you want to look it up and be a part of the organization. We welcome volunteers of all kinds. And it's a humanitarian and academic organization unifying like-minded individuals. We have a Christian worldview. Professor Wagner, more than anything else, is unabashedly a Christian, operates out of a Christian worldview, because we believe that's the way God made the world. And if you don't understand that worldview, you're like a ship lost in the middle of the ocean and you're not really sure which way you're supposed to go. Without further ado, we welcome Professor Wagner to speak to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. What a blessing it is to be here. And my heart is lifted to see a room full of people who are passionate about good governance. You've got a lot of things that are going on today, but you came here early in the morning because something inside of you has been telling you there's something wrong. There's something broken, and I want to be part of the solution. And if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But I'm looking out here and I'm seeing young people. Yay! I'm seeing some of us that have wisdom of the years, and together, you know that, even though they report it nationally and locally and down to your local newspaper, that it's all over and that we've lost and we just have to, get with the new program and start thinking like they do, wrong. When it comes to the Constitution, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to right and wrong, we will be the ones that have the message that ultimately will prevail, because right always will prevail over wrong. And I am a Christian, as she said. I know where that truth comes from, and I've seen it in my life over and over again. Now, I could spend the next 45 or 50 minutes talking about the very specific ethical requirements of campaigns. I'm not going to do that because you didn't take a break, and about 4 minutes into it, you'd be sleeping. That being said, I have provided you with an outline of everything you need to know and websites where you can go to from the Michigan Secretary of State. But the important point is, not that you know that you have to file someplace, or if you're running for state office, that you file, with the Bureau of Elections. If you're applying for the local office, you apply for the county corrections. And with regard to donations, how you have to keep all track of those. Yes, you have to do that. But what's important from our point of view is that we do it right. The other side has over and over again said there's no right and wrong. There's no good and bad. We get to tell you what's right and wrong. We get to say what's good and bad. Let us be the ones that do it right. Let us be the ones that dot the I's and cross the T's over these ethical requirements. And for conservatives in here, they're going to drive you nuts because the regulations are just what you would expect from any government putting together regulations. They are long, they are burdensome. In many ways, they are designed to keep those that have alternative, independent ideas and make it more difficult for you. That being said, don't get a bitter root, don't get angry, get up and do it anyways. You came here on a Saturday morning when you can be doing 100 other more fun and entertaining things. This is another one of those things. Let's do it, and let's do it right. This morning, I hope to spend the rest of my time talking about a shift in ethics, a shift in morality, a shift in the way that legislators and elected officials and judges think. And I'm going to begin by looking at some of the self-evident truth that we have. And at the very beginning of our country, we had this thing called the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Wow. Do you ever wonder why the left and the Michigan Liberal Union, if there was one, exists, is trying to destroy the notion that the Declaration has any influence or any relevance in American governance? That's what they're trying to get rid of. Yep. That's what they're trying to get rid of. They're trying to get rid of that notion that there is self-evident truth, that there is a right and a wrong, a good and a bad, a just and an unjust, that we can look to not only measure our own conduct, but to measure whether government is acting in a way that is good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust. And our founders understood that the reason that truth was self-evident was because it is written on our hearts. And I noticed that you all started with a prayer this morning. There's the Holy Bible up here. Wow, I love that. How many in here, and I don't want to put anybody uncomfortable, but how many in here, in some way or another, their morality or your ethics and your ethical choices informed by biblical principles or Judeo-Christian principles? If I asked that question in a different political setting in this state, I would have been booed out of here. There is a shift going on from a worldview where there is self-evident truth to a worldview that demands that you must not even acknowledge it. And if you want to know what your constitutional and ethical requirements of office are, we need to begin there. Because whoever controls the narrative is going to win the argument. Let's move to social issues for a few minutes, just so you can see what I'm talking about. The question that we need to decide as a matter of public policy is the question whether a woman should have control over her own body without and be able to do anything she wants with that body without the government interfering with that. Is that the question? No. Or is the question whether an unborn human baby that can feel pain and form cognitive thoughts, is that unborn baby's life worthy of constitutional protection? Yeah. He who controls the narrative wins and controls the argument. There has been a shift from that self-evident truth, and in this particular example, that all life has value at all stages. And we know why that is, because God created us in His image and saw that it was good and said that it is so valuable. I've got plans for your life. It's so valuable. It has so much inherent value that thou shalt not kill. So we know the self-evident truth. It's written on our heart. The good book says, yeah, it's in it may be in the Constitution, but where did that come from? It's first written on our hearts. If you want to know the ethical and constitutional ethical requirement of your office, is you need to recognize those self-evident truths first. Because they will always tell you whether something is right or wrong, good or bad, just or unjust, constitutional or unconstitutional. Now, there has been a shift to reject the founders and God's self-evident truth, and a shift to move to a more morally relative. We get to make it up and go as we go along, and because I hold office or because I wear a robe and sit on a judicial bench, I get to decide what that good or bad is going to be, separate and apart from anything else. I'm not accountable to anything. I don't have to be attentive to or responsible to any self-evident truth that you're talking about. In 1828, Webster defined politics in the following way. The science of government, that part of ethics which consists in the regulation of government of a nation or state, the preservation of its safety, peace, and prosperity. Politics originally was understood as a self-evident truth. It was part of ethics. It was part of morality. Now, you look up any contemporary definition of politics, and it has to do with entitlements and the government bestowing benefits and giving things to you and taking them away from you. And the power to do that. Where did that shift come from? There's a Latin phrase that we used to use when I used to teach constitutional law and try to make my students feel like I was smarter than I really was. It's lex rex versus rex lex. And it's the difference between the king can do no wrong or no one, not even the king, is above the law. We started out with a notion in this nation, an ethical notion, a moral notion, that no one, not even the king, not a president, not a member of Congress, not a state representative, not a township supervisor, no one, not even the king, was above the law. And in this attempt to shift the idea that there is no self-evident truth anymore, the idea is then proposed that, well, the king can do no wrong. That's what we left. That's the tyranny we left in England. But if you look at the federal judicial branch from which whence I came, the Supreme Court justices, 5 lawyers wearing robes, took this Constitution, and I assume they can read, looked at Article 5 and said, if we're going to change the Constitution or amend the Constitution, we have a politically accountable process that involves the people to do that, if we want to add a liberty, for example. And looked at the Constitution and saw that in Article 3 of the Constitution they have decided to decide disputes, and decided, well, we don't need that Constitution. We don't need no stinking Constitution. We're wearing black robes. We're smart lawyers. We went to Harvard, and we live in the eastern big cities of New York City. We know better than the rest of you, and we're going to tell you that right next to that freedom of speech in the First Amendment and the free exercise of religious conscience and the right to due process, we're going to amend the Constitution to add a new liberty called the right of personal identity, which is basically you can do everything you want as long as it feels good. Doesn't even matter if it interferes with somebody else's religious liberty. They're going to have to give up their rights for your freedom that we're creating for you and adding here. And guess what? If you don't like it, try and vote me out of office. Oh, that's right, I'm appointed for life. The other side has controlled the narrative. So they are controlling the argument, and they are winning the policy. And they are doing that by changing the ethics of governance. They've removed that from the process. We no longer have to look at self-evident truth. Then what the Supreme Court did and those 5 lawyers wearing robes did was not ethically wrong. If I don't have to follow a constitution, if the rule of law for my nation is whatever I decide it can be today, then under their worldview, what they're doing is progressive. And they're moving us forward. Folks, C.S. Lewis had it right. You can be walking forward, and if you're on the wrong road, you ain't making progress. The person that's on that wrong road and the first one to turn around, that's the person that's making progress. So my challenge to you today is when you're running for office and you're helping other people to run for office, the right road is that there is self-evident truth. There is that measure that we can look to see if there's right and wrong, good and bad, just and unjust. And no, the king can do wrong. And yes, no one, not even the king, is above the law. And the law for our nation is this Constitution. The law for our state is this Michigan Constitution. And if you look in there, and if you read those beautiful documents carefully, you will find that self-evident truth very carefully and very clearly enshrined in those documents. The only question is whether government officials and their own morality is going to cause them to look and comply with those self-evident truths. Nice. As I said, I'm a Christian. And so I see God's delegation of authority to government. No one is above the law. Now, you don't have to even be a Christian to know that, though. Our founders, for the most part, were Christians, and they looked at and they had to ask themselves as they're creating this nation, what is the proper role of government? Well, one of the things we have to do is we have to maintain security and maintain order. No question. And because of that, again, I find that very easily. I go to the Bible and I see in Romans 13:1, everyone must submit himself to governing authorities. For there is no authority except that which God has established. Authorities that exist have been established by God. Now again, these authorities, even though the government may be established by God, we're not asking for a theocracy here, are we? Those of us in our room, almost everyone in here raised their hand, say you are informed by sacred principles of some sort in your ethical decision-making and perhaps in other things that you do. But if you're elected to office, nobody in here has the intention of saying that we are going to create and change Michigan from a democratic republic into a theocracy, a dictatorship, a Christian theocracy. What we are asking, though, is that people in a different room today can raise their hand and say that our secular influences and our secular ideas are what influence my decision making. All we're saying in this room is that, well, you know what? There are some pretty good sacred principles out there too, and they ought to allow me to be informed by those principles. For goodness sake, when we in this nation allowed our government officials to be informed by sacred principles, we did a few things like end slavery. It wasn't a secular principle that ended slavery in this nation. It wasn't a secularly informed idea that ended slavery in this nation or made life better for women in this nation. The government does have a role, and as conservatives, we understand that. I understand it because I'm informed by the biblical principle that says, for he is God's servant to do good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. But he is God's servant, an agent of wrath, bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Government does have a proper role. When we go to the grocery store, we don't want to fear getting held up and robbed. And yes, government, that's a proper role, protecting society. Protecting our freedoms that we have, protecting that self-evident truth that is our liberty, preserving those liberties, protecting our safety. I worked in all three branches of the government. And in a couple of those, I was given the privilege of exercising a tremendous amount of power. As a United States prosecutor, I literally had the power to bring charges against people that would put them in prison, take their liberty away for the rest of their life, or to take their life itself using due process. As a federal judge, I had much of the same authority. Before I was allowed to exercise the privilege of any of that kind of power, though, a person brought one of these things and put it in my hand. And I had to put my hand on the Holy Bible, raise my other hand toward heaven, and swear and affirm to uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me